Hey kids, it's me, Teacher A. Let me help you on inverse sine function. Okay? Let's start. Okay, chill. I know there are 6 inverse trigonometric functions or 6 inverse circular functions. So, why inverse sine function only? Okay. Because I want you to build your skills first. Gusto ko maging komportable muna kayo dito sa isang inverse function, inverse trigonometric function. And let's begin with sine, the inverse sine function. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to graph an inverse sine function. I will also teach you how to get the domain and range of an inverse sine function. And then later, I'm also going to teach you how to evaluate values involving inverse sine function. Alright? Are you ready? Okay, let's start. On your screen, you see the graph of y equals sine x. Okay, so bakit y equals sine x ang nandyan? Ang kailangan natin, the graph of the inverse sine function. Okay, ganito kasi yan. If you're given the graph of the original function, you can easily find the graph of the inverse sine function. Okay? But before we do that, let's get the domain and range of sine x. Based on the graph, can you check or can you give me the domain and range of sine x? Domain, set of possible values of x. So, as you can see here, lahat ng values ng x merong point sa graph, right? Kasi ang arrow, ibig sabihin ng arrow dito, it will continue on this side. Ito rin. Yung arrow dito, magko-continue lang siya dito sa side na to. Okay? So, the domain of your sine x is the set of all real numbers. Okay? What about the range? The range, set of all values of y. So, anong napapansin nyo sa graph ng sine x? Ang meron lang values ng y ay from here, ba? Ayun o. Meron dito sa graph na to. Okay? All the way here. Kita nyo? Okay? Pero kapag lagpas na sa 1, wala nang graph yung y equals sine x. Dito rin sa ilalim ng negative 1. Wala namang graph yung sine x. So that's why the range of y equals sine x is from negative 1 up to positive 1. Alright? Okay. So, can we now graph the inverse sine function? Not yet, because if you check the graph of y equals sine x, it's not 1-to-1. How? You recall your horizontal line test. Anong sinasabi ng horizontal line test? Kapag nag-draw ka ng horizontal line, okay? So, draw ka lang ng horizontal line dito. Dapat, para masabi ninyo na 1-to-1 yung graph ng isang function, dapat ang tatamaan lang nung horizontal line sa graph nung given function is at most 1 point. Pero pag nag-draw ka dito ng horizontal, it's very clear no na tatama dito sa point na to. And then if you continue, tatama na naman dito. And so on, may tatamaan na naman siya sa part na to. Right? So, it's clearly not a 1-to-1 function. Kasi kapag hindi 1-to-1, hindi tayo makakakuha ng inverse function. Okay? So, anong pwedeng gawin para makakuha ng inverse sine function? We restrict the domain of sine. Okay? So, paano yung pag-restrict? Kailangan, pag nag-restrict tayo ng domain, kailangan yung range, yung pa rin, -1 to 1. Okay? So, ang pipiliin ko as our restricted domain is ito. From here up to here. From -pi/2 to pi/2. So, let me do this. Okay? So, that's our restricted domain. So, let me do this also. Okay? Also here, let's do it. Okay? So, yan lang yung focus natin. Now, ang sunod yung gagawin, to be able to graph the inverse sine function, you have to draw the line y equals x. Okay? Lagi niyong tatandaan, if you have the graph of a function, and to get the graph of its inverse, all you have to do is to reflect all the points doon sa y equals x. Ito yung sinasabi ko. Okay? So, where is the line y equals x? Here. Okay? So, that's the line. Okay? Ang gagawin nyo, lahat ng graph na nakikita ninyo from -pi/2 to pi/2, i-reflect ninyo doon sa y equals x. Let me write. This is y equals x. Okay? This is the line y equals x. Okay? O, mag-reflect tayo. Paano ba mag-reflect? Ganito. You see this point? Okay? Gagawa lang kayo ng line perpendicular to y equals x. So, ito, perpendicular. So, you make 90 degrees, right? Ayan. Okay? Tapos, so, ito yung 90 degrees perpendicular. Okay? Tapos, kung gano'n to kahaba, itong part na to, gano'n din dapat kahaba yung kabilang side, here. Okay? Tapos, ayan na. So, this point, mapupunta siya dito. Okay? Let's do more. Kunyari, itong point na to. Okay? Gawa ka ng perpendicular line, tapos measure ka ng equal. So, ganyan lang dapat kahaba. So, dito. So, maybe here. Okay? And so on. So, hindi lang ganun ka-accurate ang graph ni teacher, pero ganyan talaga gumawa ng graph ng inverse sine. Okay? And then, you connect these points. Okay? Ito yun, no? You connect this point. Okay? So, ito yung magiging itsura niya. Okay? And then, you do the same doon sa other side. So, itong point na to, saan pupunta to? You make a line perpendicular to y equals x. And then, dapat same yung distance. Kung ano yung distance nito, yun din yung distance dito. So, let's say dito siya mapupunta. And so on. Ito pa, dito siya mapupunta. Okay? And then you'll have this graph. Okay? So, let me color it. Here. That one. Okay? Yung color green, yan na yung graph ng inverse sine function. Okay? So, may isa na kayong alam ng relationship ng isang function at saka ng inverse niya. Ano? The graphs of a function and its inverse are symmetric with respect to the line y equals x. Okay? Ano pa ang relationship ng original function sa inverse niya? Ito yon. kung ano yung domain ng original, range naman siya ng inverse. Tapos, kung ano yung range ng original function, yun naman yung domain ng inverse function. What do I mean by that? Let me write here. So, di ba yung green, that's the graph of the inverse sine function? Okay, so we now have y equals the inverse sine of x. Yes, that's how you write it. Sine inverse of x. Ang domain ng ating sine inverse or inverse sine function ay range ng original function. Okay? So, I'm going to write here, the domain is negative 1, 1. Okay? And then, ang range nito is going to be the domain of the original function. Pero, hindi ito. Because, di ba, ni-restrict na natin ang domain. Ano yung restricted domain? Ang restricted domain ay negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Di ba? Bakit natin ni-restrict yung domain? Para maging 1-to-1 yung function so that its inverse will exist. Okay? So, the range of the inverse sine function is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Okay? Again, this is the graph of y equals sine inverse of x. Okay? What is the domain? Negative 1 to 1. What about the range? Negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Okay? So, I hope that is clear. Alright. So, here's another relationship between the sine function and its inverse. Do you still recall the composition of function? Yun yung f circle g of x. Yun yun. Okay? So, sine of sine inverse of x is equal to x. But, this x must be in the domain of the sine inverse. Kung sino yung nasa loob na function. Okay? But what is the domain of the sine inverse? It's negative 1 to 1. Okay? Another note. The sine inverse of sine x is also equal to x. But this time, x must be in the domain of, what's the inner function? It's sine. So, it should be in the domain of sine. But what is the domain of sine? We consider here the restricted domain of sine, which is the negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Okay? Okay. Let me give you some examples. Here. Let's evaluate sine inverse of sine pi over 4. So, ibig sabihin ng evaluate, let's get the value. Okay? Based on this note, actually the second note, sine inverse of sine x is equal to x. So, ikakopy mo lang daw to. But you have to check if this x lies on this interval, negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So, let us see. Is it really equal to pi over 4? You have to check if pi over 4 is in the domain of sine. What is the domain of sine? Negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Okay? Nandyan kaya siya. Okay? Ang ibig sabihin nito, you can draw a line. Okay? If this is 0, you can name it, this one is pi over 2, and this is the negative pi over 2. Nandyan ba ang pi over 4? Yes, kasi ang pi over 4 nandito here. So, andyan ang pi over 4. So, check. Pi over 4 is in the domain of sine. So, therefore, This is the final answer. That is the value of sine inverse of sine pi over 4. Okay, what about number 2? Is it equal to 2? What are you going to check? You have to check if 2 is in the domain of sine inverse. But what is the domain of sine inverse? Here. Nandyan ba siya? Sa interval negative 1 to 1? Wala, no? No. Right? So, therefore, hindi siya equal sa 2. Okay? Anong sagot? No value. Okay? So, it has no value. Okay?